I guess I have a question, Ms. Lutey, regarding the recent settlement, the resolution that came with the settlement agreement for the injection wells, and I was a little disappointed that you weren't here for a lot of that deliberation, because I know your name is on the brief, and I had some issues with what I was told by our attorneys in Office of Counsel Services is an anomaly, not normal standard wording, which the phrase that gave Corporation Counsel the final authority over that settlement agreement said with final approval of Corporation Counsel. So can you speak to why that was put in there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've got an upper respiratory infection, so I cough a lot. In terms of that language, my understanding is that that's pretty standard, but the reason I normally would put that in, and I didn't sign that one, but one I do, is because it controls, we're not trying to usurp anyone's authority. It's really control over the language of the release agreement that we formulate and have signed off by opposing counsel.
Okay, but is there an understanding in Corp Counsel that the client, I mean, you basically have two clients, you have the county council and the mayor, so should that not be the ultimate authority that signs off with the, you know, we get input from the council, from Corp Counsel, and then council makes the ultimate decision on spending. So I haven't seen that before in legislation for any of the settlements that we've done, but maybe you can share more about how often you use that phrase, or is it just for certain types of legislation?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, for the most part, we just do forms. So in terms of releases and so forth and that type of language in a reso, we don't reinvent the wheel. So I'm not sure offhand how many times I've used it or that it's been used in my office, but I could certainly go back and see, I mean, from claims and so forth. But it's not as though I look at one case and add it in and look at another and take it out. It's really more of a form.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? That was sort of our main question. Vice Chair Rollins-Fernandez.
Mahalo, Chair. Mahalo, aloha, Ms. Lutey. So we had some testifiers this morning join us, and they alleged some serious claims today. These include false statements, tampering and concealing documents, and other accusations of corruption. How do you respond to these accusations?
Ms. Lutey.
Thank you, Chair. Well, in terms of what they're actually complaining about, I can only talk to the cases that I've handled with them. So in regard to Mr. Fishkin, I believe that he was assisting Chris Salem in a lawsuit that I handled briefly. I think that case may have been alive for a month or two. And I won it by motion for summary judgment after the court reviewed all of the documents that were presented, and it was specific to a UIPA request, not a FOIA request. And that case was dismissed by the court. After that case was granted, as Mr. Bilberry and I walked down the hallway, Mr. Fishkin walked behind us screaming at first Mr. Bilberry and then me about how we were corrupt and he'd take our jobs, which eventually resulted in a restraining order against Mr. Fishkin on behalf of Mr. Bilberry, and I was the witness in that case. But I certainly never committed fraud. We produced everything we had in that document. In terms of Mr. Carroll, he sued us in federal court alleging excessive force after kicking a police officer who then tasered him. And likewise, we went through depositions and so forth, all of the discovery. And Judge Watson granted my motion for summary judgment and dismissed his case, finding that the force was justified based on the kick, which was admitted by Mr. Carroll.
Vice Chair Rollins-Fernandez.
Mahalo. Mahalo, Chair. How do you, as Director, how do you plan to require staff to maintain neutrality on issues that they represent? It is clear that right now and under previous leadership, this has not been required, and we have seen that behavior recently with the injection well lawsuit.
Ms. Moody?
Thank you, Chair. That's something that we had a bit of a discussion on the day before, and unfortunately I just was too sick to attend the following day. But in terms of that, it's really hard sometimes when you're in the middle of the battle to see things clearly. And so we discuss handling it in a manner where we advise all of you to the best of our ability, and that's going to include things that, the way I explain it is, we tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that there's never any question if we end up getting hit hard on something or hit at all. In other words, an adverse judgment where you would say, gosh, you never told us that that was a possible issue, because we've told you. And so I don't want it to be perceived as though maybe someone isn't completely neutral, because sometimes it's kind of hard to be completely neutral. We've had cases for years, but we do try that. But we have to tell you everything, and sometimes it's going to just be things that you're probably not going to want to hear from us.
Ms. Rollins-Reyes?
Mahalo, Chair. So we met before you and I met in my office before the second day of the GET committee meeting, and we spoke about your leadership in encouraging your deputies to try to share more of the broader picture, what's possible, what's probable, and what's more than likely not going to happen. Did you get an opportunity to speak with your deputies after we met? Because you weren't there on the floor. I was hoping you were going to be on the floor that day to ensure that that type of information was provided to the council, because it wasn't being provided to the council. And I understand that you were sick, but I'm wondering if you had an opportunity to meet with them to provide that guidance.
Ms. Moody?
Thank you. After we met, I went straight down and we discussed all of that.
Because that next meeting, Mr. Kushi said he wasn't aware of a meeting that you and I had.
Ms. Moody?
Well, I remember it.
Okay. So last question there. As a director of Corporation Counsel, would you allow the department to go to Supreme Court for a win on paper if it meant putting our community and natural resources at risk and opening the county to further litigation?
Ms. Lutey?
Thank you. In terms of the decision on that, it's not our call. So it's going to be dependent on the body. I certainly would not want to see this home that I've grown up in be decimated by pollution or otherwise. But at the end of the day, our job is only to advise you, and then this body and or the mayor combined would need to make that call, and we will support that.
Mahalo. Last follow-up, sorry.
It's okay.
So the role of Corporation Counsel is to advise, like you said. I felt like I was fighting with Corporation Counsel my points. I didn't feel like at the last meetings we were being advised. I felt like we were being influenced. And we discussed in our meeting that sometimes when you're in the trenches, it's difficult to remove yourself from being before the council and not being before a judge where you're trying to persuade the judge. Being before the council, you're advising on both sides of any legal issue. And again, I felt that we were being persuaded to vote for a side. And I was hoping that your discussion with your deputies the next day or that day would have resulted in a more impartial deliverance of information to the council. So do you have any comments about the role of advising versus influencing?
Ms. Moody?
Thank you. In terms of advising as opposed to influencing, there have been times, and it comes up somewhat often, where the body wants us to weigh in on what the best route is. And so typically what we try to do is say, well, here's pros and cons of if you do this, and here's pros and cons of if you don't. And try to, I mean, it's not always going to be balanced, because sometimes the cons of not doing something or doing it may outweigh the opposite. But in terms of our role in advising, that's really my goal, is to make sure that we're advising you, but advising you fully on all of it, all the pros and cons, and not trying to force you into a position.
Mahalo, Ms. Lutey. Mahalo, Chair.
Okay, mahalo. Ms. Rollins-Fernandez. Councilmember Paulton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Lutey, for being here today. I just was, yeah, and thank you for meeting in my office previously. I think your committee confirmation came like the day right after we met, and so I had some additional questions now that it's been some time later, and a lot of things have happened regarding what we discussed previous to the committee hearing, and I was wondering if you had had a chance to be up with the subject matter from my committee hearing and some of the additional resources.
Ms. Lutey.
Thank you. Are you talking about the presentation?
Yeah.
I actually haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but I thought in terms of our conversation, I found it actually really mentally stimulating, because I haven't had a conversation on these topics in years, since honestly I was in law school. But I haven't had a chance to watch the presentation, although I do intend to. It's just...
How's about the NEA articles?
The ones that I read those.
And any thoughts as to those?
Same thing. I think they're really mentally stimulating. I'm not sure in terms of, like, I totally understand where you're coming from and the concerns that you've got. There's a Supreme Court case out of Hawaii that I then read after I'd read the articles, where they basically say that there's no route that way, but it's really a topic of discussion, I think, more than anything else at this point, which I hope we keep having. Like I said, it was like one of the most stimulating conversations, not to offend anybody else, that I've had on this topic in a very long time.
Okay, thank you. And also, do you know of any reason the county should not enforce SMA permit that the mayor agreed to?
Ms. Moody.
Thank you. I'm not sure what that one's about. I have really no idea. If you gave me a specific, I could go figure that out, but I haven't been involved in any SMAs or been consulted on it, so I'm just not sure what that issue's about.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Sinenti.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Moana, for being here and for meeting with my staff and myself. In our meeting, we did ask about, Corporation Counsel and when they're so invested in a case like the injection well case, upwards of 7 years. I mean, is it possible for the staff to kind of step back and look at it from a different perspective, having invested so much time, on one side of the case?
Ms. Moody.
Thank you. That's something I remember us having a pretty good discussion about. And my thought on it is this: if this body wants to work towards resolution of it, then I'm not sure that the parties who have been invested for 7 years can necessarily sit at the same table, because they're entrenched. But that doesn't mean we'd exclude them. I just think maybe sometimes you need to get a fresh voice in and have someone either mediate it. I don't think this is an arbitration type case, but maybe try and get us all to middle ground, because I think ultimately we all have the same goal, which is protection of the environment. So at least we have a starting point, but sometimes when you've been involved for so long, that's really difficult.
Okay, thank you. Follow up. Just a clarification. Was the SMA permit case, was that Mr. Salem's case you were
Ms. Lutey?
referring to earlier?
I didn't have a case. My case with Mr. Salem was over UIPA. It was a UIPA request where he had asked for some documents in the Kiva system that he attached to his complaint and that I also produced to him. They just look different because depending on what screen and the access you have to it, according to our IT, it comes out looking differently. But I wasn't involved in any SMA issues with him. It was over a lot that he owned out in Napili, I think it was, Lahaina side.
And that case has since been
It got dismissed by the
dismissed?
court.
You know if he has appealed the case?
Ms. Lutey?
No, there's been no appeal of that case. He had another case with my coworker, Brian Bilberry. I'm not sure if that's an SMA or not. I just, a little foggy this morning. But that has also been dismissed by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Mr. Salem could choose to ask for writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he's got a year to do that. He's run out some of that time, but he could still do that. It's just that would, I don't think there's much likelihood they'd take it, but he could. But it's currently not active.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sinensi. Okay, any other questions? Second round of questions, and then we'll just go, I'm just going to go down and on deliberations. We'll start with on this side with Councilmember Kama. If you have any questions or comments, and it's okay to say no. But
I have no questions or comments, Chair.
okay, thank you. Councilmember Sugimura.
Ready for the question, Chair.
Okay, Councilmember Paulton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm ready as well.
Okay, Councilmember Hokama. Council Vice Chair Rollins-Fernandez.
Mahalo, Chair. I met with Ms. Lutey a couple of times now, and through budget and meetings the last few months, we had a chance to see what direction Ms. Lutey would take Corporation Counsel as director. While I respect Ms. Lutey as professional, I'm not confident in her ability to lead the department in the direction that it needs to go. Our community has lost faith in our Corporation Counsel, and I do not see the change in the leadership since Ms. Lutey has been acting director. I believe I was voted onto the council for change, and I promised that I would fight for that change. I feel that this department needs a serious revamp, and unfortunately, I do not feel that that will happen under her leadership. When I met with Ms. Lutey to express my concerns, and she assured me that she would address them, and I put my faith in her leadership to make that appropriate adjustments with her deputies, to be more impartial, to not present information which obviously advocates for a side. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So while I know that she likely has the votes to be approved anyways, I do not feel that it is important. I do feel that this is important to be said. We as a county owe our community better. We need serious change, and we need it fast. I hope that if Ms. Lutey is approved, that she take a serious look at the reputation of Corporation Counsel within this community and work hard to change the culture within the department to start working on behalf of the county rather than individuals and special interests within that community. Mahalo, Chair.
Mahalo, Vice Chair Rollins-Fernandez. Councilmember Lee.
Madam Chair, I support Ms. Lutey, and I am ready to vote.
Okay, Councilmember Molina.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for my second and last time on the motion. You know, it's funny how the climate has changed since the committee meeting regarding Ms. Lutey's appointment. 8-0, and it was stated by, I believe, some members that, you know, first female Corporation Counsel, person of Hawaiian ancestry. I've worked with Ms. Lutey before on my first go-around on the council, and I found her to be responsive. But this position by nature, Madam Chair, it's one where you're going to get disagreement from members of the public on whatever decision you make. It's sort of like us as elected officials. We're going to have to make some tough decisions, and it's a darned if you do, darned if you don't. So it's somewhat similar to what any position, anyone who heads a department, a very high-profile department like Corporation Counsel, where disagreement is part of the job. And I certainly respect people's opinions about their concerns with the appointment. There are mechanisms in our charter where if a person, whether it be an elected official or an appointed official, if there's any perceived or evidence of malfeasance of decision-making, there's a process for removal. Also, if the mayor decides to, upon hearing many, many complaints, and if there is evidence to back that up, the mayor has the option of coming to this council to ask for removal, or simply he can just ask his director to step down, as we've seen with one of our recent nominees. So I believe we should just focus on the individual's qualifications. She certainly met that. And I'm willing to stick my neck out, like some of us will, to support Ms. Lutey and give her that opportunity and to address some of these concerns. If some perceived wrongs need to be made right, then so be it. I believe she has the integrity to go ahead and do that. So I'm putting my faith in her. And so I will support Ms. Lutey. And it's not an easy position. And you're going to get slammed no matter which way you go, like we do in our capacities as council members. So I ask for the members' consideration for Ms. Lutey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molina. Councilmember Sinensi?
Thank you, Chair. Looking back in previous councils, it's just been 5 months here. And so at previous councils and administrations, we understand that it was a very litigious administration and a lot of high-profile cases, some of which I'm just, still stepping into and trying to understand. So, and I don't, it's from past administration, your past boss, past directors. So, I would want to see that change at the Corporation Council, where we're not always jumping into litigations, but maybe looking at other options like legislation, something that I would be more pervious to. Again, looking at settlement options and how we can work together with our community. Many of our testifiers to this process supported gender equality, especially in some of the leadership roles that the county has. I'm not a judge or a jury. I'm just part of a 9-member board that gets to vote. And if there are any litigations to go through, I would rather it not come through us but through the court system. So I'm gonna give Moana a chance. I'm gonna support her today with reservations, just so that we can look forward to working together and like some other members said, change some of the Corporation Council's previous stances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sinensi. Okay, if there's no other comments, I'll make my comments. And, I have been hoping for a change in corporate council as well, and that is why I voted no on our previous corp council. Unfortunately, he made it through, and then we found out that some of us who had some concerns were, the concerns were materialized. And I had been hoping for a change in our new corp council, and that was one of the reasons I voted in committee. But one of my biggest concerns in that committee was a question I asked about whether being a litigator was going to hamper our corp council's ability to serve the mayor and to serve the county council objectively. And my big disappointment in the last couple of weeks has been Ms. Lutey's absence in the injection well case, because I think, to me, that is one of the most important issues we are going to deal with this year and maybe in this complete term as a county council. I haven't seen any representation on consequences if we do go ahead and we win this case, but I've seen a lot of one-sided arguments for us going to Supreme Court appeal, and a lot of what I call hysteria about the cesspool issue, and I believe that that was one of the things we were told by our vice chair that was going to be discussed the next day and, you know, mitigated by Ms. Lutey, and of course she wasn't able to make it. But I just have a lot of reservations about the way the Corp Counsel seems to be continuing to influence the council unduly. And so I think there are the votes to install Ms. Lutey, but I think it also, I agree with our vice chair that it needs to be said, and there needs to be this this point of view of the public. The public has been aware for a very long time that there are problems with Corp Counsel, and that's why the charter amendment passed, allowing the council its own legal counsel. Unfortunately, it was really not clarified, and I don't think it helped any that the interpretation of it is that we need 6 votes, because that really doesn't allow us, if there's a split down the middle. And sometimes our hands are tied, but having a difference of opinion, especially about this issue of whether Corp Counsel, whether it's standard language for Corp Counsel to insert its own final approval in a resolution regarding a settlement, that was a big turning point for me in my decision. And I didn't like hearing the difference in opinion that this is standard language and sometimes it's put in there and sometimes it's not, because to me it doesn't feel very standard. I've never seen it before in my term. But I am not going to support this appointment, and I am still looking for a change in Corp Counsel. I just have not seen it yet, and that's what I was hoping to see before today. So I'm going to go ahead and call for the question, and we'll do it by voice vote first. All those in favor of unless there's any other comments, all those in favor of the motion on the floor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Okay, so the ayes have it, 7 ayes and 2 noes. Vice Chair Rollins-Fernandez and the chair. And the measure passes. Okay, congratulations, Ms. Lutey.
This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org.